So before I get started, any questions on that a huge amount of material I dumped on you on the video? So you all know all those controls, right, in the NIST guide, and you'll be able to memorize those and yeah. Okay, we are going to look at some of those again when we look at the network security section, when we look at the operating system security section, some of those other things. Knowing those types of controls is very important, especially if you end up going to work for the government or actually do any job related to building cybersecurity. It's a good guidance. These are things that, hey, this is how you set things up right. Or at least this is what we consider best practice. And so it's just something to think about. Okay, the guidance is out there, the documents are out there, the information is out there if you know where to look, you know how to read it, and you know how to do it. People who just try to implement security by, oh, I think I know what I'm doing, doesn't always work. And even if you know what you're doing, it doesn't always work. Okay, and I'm saying this because, so my son is taking CS 121 right now. And so he's in the dorms, but last night I get a call, Dad, can we do a Zoom session? I'm having a lot of problems with my homework assignment. And when he took 120, he never asked for help. So I was like, okay. So he's building this program on his laptop. He's using Windows subsystem, Linux subsystem for Windows. Got the compiler in there. And it's read a list of animals. Some of you may even be taking this class. Read a list of animals and then, print out the list. So like add bird to the list. So he adds bird, add cat, it adds cat. If he does this by hand, just testing it, testing's always good, it works fine. He reads from the file, it doesn't work. Including, it prints out the list and it says the first animal he has is a birdvark. Somehow a mix between bird and aardvark. We have no idea why it's happening, but there's some type of programming error, some buffer overflow or something that's not right. So he emailed me the file because I couldn't help him with Zoom. I ran on my computer, it's fine on mine. I compile it on my computer, it's absolutely fine. Compile it on his computer, it's a problem. Now I thought we were using the same software and everything, so I got to check with him on that. I tried it on 3 different computers, it works just fine, but his laptop, it doesn't. This is a problem we often have with computer science and with software. I can test and test and test and it works fine on one machine, I move it to another machine, it suddenly doesn't work. Typically, when I recompile it, it's worse. C is supposed to be a portable language. The compilers are supposed to be standardized. If you look at the C standard, so I'm bringing this up because of compliance issues. It lists, this is what must happen. This is how this is what this operation means. This is how it defines. There's an appendix in the C standard, Appendix J, that talks about compatibility issues. There are things that happen in the C programming language that are considered undefined. What are the results of a computation if you divide by 0? If it's a floating point number, it's defined as infinity. If it's an integer, it's undefined behavior. In other words, they don't care. Some things are compiler specific. So it says, depending on the compiler you're using, or the architecture, or the operating system you're using, it will define what the results are. There's a whole appendix of all these things. It's a standard. You think everything's defined? No, not everything's defined. Some things make sense that they're compiler specific. If you're using a 32-bit machine versus a 64-bit, that'll change things. That makes sense. But some things don't make sense to me why they don't work. This causes us problems. People have a mental model, an idea of how systems work, and they're not right. And maybe they're right for the 10 machines they tried it on, but not machine 11. Okay, and I'm just bringing this up. So when we talk about compliance issues, when we talk about meeting the standards, even then things sometimes break. And even then you pull your hair out. Wait, this should have been working. That's what I was doing last night. I have no idea what's doing. I have no idea what's going on either. And birdvark made no sense. Again, because bird was read first, then aardvark. The aard part of aardvark should have overwritten the bird part. There's no reason there should be a bird there. Something else broke, and I have no idea what. And there are ways I know how to debug these things, but I have to physically go on his machine to do it. or have them send me the executable, but our email system says, oh, somebody's emailing you executable. That could be an attack. You have to zip it up or something. So anyway, I just bring that up because that was last night. All right, let's go to, wait a minute. So no questions on that stuff? All right. I'm going to talk a little today about operations security. So as I mentioned last time, I think I mentioned last time, we've talked about cybersecurity overarching concepts. Identification, authentication, the confidentiality, integrity, availability. Even talked about crypto, which is kind of a fundamental concept because it kind of overlays a lot of different aspects of cyber. And then laws and compliance. And now what we're going to do is, like I said, when you talk about defense in depth, when you talk about other things, for defense in depth, I might want to protect the data, or protect the application, or protect the operating system, or protect the network, or protect the physical systems, or deal with the humans. So I'm working my way up here on this list. So we're going to go all through these. Now, if I look at this in terms of chapters of the book, this is really chapters of the book, and you're like, wait a minute, we're only a third way through the semester. The stuff after the human element or physical security gets really detailed, and I want to spend more time on those. Okay, so this first third of the class covers like half the text in terms of chapters and stuff. And we are having a test in a week. I forgot to mention that, remind people of that. Up through today's, through operation security. Okay. Tuesday, I'll kind of do a review. I'll cover the first 10 lectures in an hour. You know I can do it. All right, so let's look at the operation security. Hopefully you can see this. What is it? It's basically a holistic approach to cybersecurity. And there's basically 5 steps we want to deal with that I'll go through in these later slides. But the idea is you identify your critical information. You analyze the threats. Hey, we talked about that earlier, right? You analyze the vulnerabilities. We talked about that earlier. We'll go into much more depth in that later. You assess the risk. You apply the countermeasures. Those are the controls I talked about last time. And then rinse and repeat and try again. Now, there's a concept people have in terms of doing this type of work. It's called analysis paralysis. People will spend time looking at this. They'll spend a month, 2 months going through this in really rigorous detail. I'll identify my critical information. I'm going to go out and figure out all these threats, analyze my system vulnerabilities, assess the risk, apply the counter, and then actually they stop and say, okay, we want to do this, we're going to apply these countermeasures. Well, I just heard about this new risk, or we just updated our system, so maybe the threats are different. And so they go back and look at it again. And we've seen this happen again and again where people are spending so much time. What about this? What about this? They never take the first step. They don't do an incremental improvement to their security posture. And the idea of OPSEC is to do incremental improvement. You're not going to be 100% secure right away, but you can be more secure today than you were yesterday. And that is good. The other thing, and I think I've mentioned before in this class, if you make your system much stronger than an easier target, the bad guys will go after the easier target. Those who read fantasy novels, you don't have to outrun the dragon, you just have to outrun the hobbit. That's all that matters. Okay, not the hobbit maybe, but you don't have to be perfect. Now, that is different than the way some people treat security. That is different than the way cybersecurity was treated when I was taught it in the late 80s. Then you were either secure or not secure. Now How secure are you? What is the risk? Because risk really matters. You're never going to be perfectly secure. Yes?
There's something similar called risk management. Are those two the same things?
Risk management is in this process, yes. Yeah, because now once you do all this, you assess the risk. One thing you want to do in this application of countermeasures over here, let me get the wait a minute, that's not the right one. Oh, I'm on the wrong, there it is. There we go. When you apply these countermeasures over here, which countermeasures do you want to do? I think I mentioned this before. You know, I've got a watch here. You know, it's a fit. What is it? Fitbit. Thank you. I was going to say iFit. It's not an iFit. It's a Fitbit. You know, it's a couple $100. I want to keep it secure. You know, if I go to a hotel, I'm not going to leave it on the counter while I leave the hotel room and the maid comes in. But I'll put it in the hotel safe. I'm not going to bring my own $10,000 safe, put it in the hotel room to protect a $200 watch. You know, it doesn't make sense. So when I look at part of risk, I look at what's the cost. Now, Cyber 210, we go over this in detail, and we actually have you work through a couple examples with a workbook. You know, here's a security plan. Here's how you would do it for this company. Here's how you assess the risk, and you actually map out and figure out all these things. Okay, it is a business process, and they teach things like this in business too, because risk management, assessing the risk and figuring out your countermeasures, isn't just for cybersecurity. You do that when it comes to flood protection, fire protection, theft, anything that puts your system at risk. And also understand that when we're looking at the threats, some of the threats even to an information system may be physical. Somebody steals a laptop, that's a physical threat, but it's a threat to your information system because now they have access to your data. All right, so get rid of that. Come on. So the first step of operation security, and by the way, there are exams out there on like becoming a cybersecurity analyst or whatever. One of the questions is, what's the first step of operation security? Identify your critical information. Okay. And as I said, it's part of a continuous review process. Critical information today includes the grades for your classes. Next semester, I'm teaching a different class. That's new critical information. Now, maybe we'll be able to categorize it together and always say grade book for classes, no matter what, but sometimes it's something new. There's information I have obtained recently for a grant we have. That's critical information related to that grant. That is new information. It's a type of work we've never done before, so we don't have a category for it. So it's part of this continuous process. Now, critical information can be defined internally. You know, the secret recipe for Coca-Cola, the source code for your tool. But some people say, oh yeah, my source code is open source. We're going to publicly make it available. It's not critical information. It's not secret. So it depends on the organization, what matters, what doesn't matter. You look at Facebook, you can see a lot of people have different opinions of what's private. Some people share things I would never share. There are things I might share that other people don't, right? And so it's internally defined. Some things could be externally defined, like personally identifiable information. Now, because it was pre-recorded slides, did I talk about that yesterday's slides or Tuesday's slides, personally identifiable information? I don't think I did. Okay. It is a general term referring to any sensitive data used to identify, contact, or locate a specific individual. It is not a term specific to HIPAA regulations. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. I talked about that a little. HIPAA is a really good example because they define a lot of things. They define personally identifiable health information in there. because that's what they're really worried about. You know, the fact that I had prostate cancer in the spring is personally identifiable health information. Now I shared it. I don't have to though. You know, and if I didn't want to share it, nobody has a right to get that information. All right. But personally identifiable information is things that identify a person or can be used to identify a person. So full name, that helps. Date of birth, my street or email address, biometric data, my fingerprint can be used to help identify me. Iris scan can be used to help identify me. Just a street address may be able to be used to identify me. Not always perfectly. Everybody in my family has a first name that starts with the letter J. We all have the same last name, so we're all J. Alsfoss. So that when there were 5 of us living in that house, you know, you could get it down to J. Alsfoss at that address, you get it down to 5 people. Actually, J. Alsfoss, you still get it down to 5 people. We did find a couple years ago 2 other Alsfosses in the world in Brazil. But that was it, at least on Google and Facebook. Alsfoss was a combined name from our unmarried names. And it does cause problems. I'll bring this up one time. Years ago, I went into the doctor's office. They pulled in, the doctor walks in reading a chart. Okay, looking at your annual exam, everything is, no, you didn't ever have a pap smear, did you? Went back, returned my wife's chart and got mine. They picked a J. Alsfoss, you know. So there are a lot of things we have to look at. These usually, this stuff is externally defined. It's not something you have a choice of as a company saying, oh, that's personally identifiable. And if we look at HIPAA, and like I said, I got a link here. You can go a whole lot of information. But there are things that we have as direct indicators, they call them. You know, name, address, things like that. There are other things they call that can directly indicate somebody. A maiden name or a mother's maiden name is used to identify people. An alias. So my official first name is James. I go by Jim. Those can be pretty commonly combined. Fingerprint, voice prints, telephone and fax numbers. You know, my cell phone number is a pretty good link to me. So security number, passport number, driver's license number, taxpayer identification number. My financial accounts and records, so my bank account number can be linked to me. So all these account numbers, credit card numbers, medical health records, my computer's network address, personal property records, my vehicle registration, title, license plate number, just a photograph of me, employment records, education records, all these things can be used to identify people directly. All of those things, therefore, are critical information in your computer system and must be protected. This stuff are other identifiers. They're things, when combined with further information, identifying an individual may be difficult without this other information, but easy with this. Now, I was asking 2 of my grad students yesterday about this. 2 students in my room. And I was asking them, let's assume I have a single bit of data. Bits, 1s and 0s in a computer system. How much information can you convey with a single bit? Well, you know, there's a whole Shannon's information theory related to this, right? It's, you know, it's either true or false. It's one of 2 things. You can identify 2 things with 1 bit. I said, but if that bit identifies one of these 2 grad students, you're a 1, you're a 0, and I say it's 1, everything about you is encompassed in that 1 bit of information. I know your name, your age, your weight, your marital status, your academic records, all these about you are kind of tied to that 1. If it's a 0, that's not you, that's the student. And everything about that student. And so this other information we have can give us a lot of context, and this causes a lot of problems. Census data. If you can query census data and pull out some information. You know, hey, let me look across this room, right? Let me give the average GPA of everybody. Got it. Let me give the average GPA of the non-ROTC students. There's 3 ROTC students in here. So now I know the average is just those 3. One of those students is female. So maybe I can say the average female GPA, now the average, or male GPA, the average non-ROT. You know, I can play these games and actually do what we call tracker data, and able to get the information from the one by doing math. There was a congressman, or I think it was congressman, anyway, who had a medical condition he didn't want people to know about. I didn't mention this one, did I? No. He lived in a small town in New England. He went there, took some time off, went to the hospital to be treated something. The hospital released just some identifiers. They said, hey, we treated this many patients this year in this age category with these diseases. Well, they only had one person in their 50s with a particular disease, and people happened to know he was in his 50s and treated that same time period they were treating, so they knew what disease he had. And they were able to track it down and made a big news story about it. You know, Gritman is being very careful right now with COVID because of this type of stuff. So if I look at last week's data, because this week's data I think comes out today or tomorrow, they said they had admitted in the previous week 11 patients with COVID into Gritman Hospital. They never say how many go home, because that can affect your figuring out who's in the hospital, how many people are in the hospital, that they have COVID. Because you say, oh, and one person went home. Well, you know somebody was in the hospital and just came home, they must be the one with COVID. So they're not going to mention that. And they do it per week, not per day, because we have such lower numbers here. It could violate the private information with people. This makes our job as cybersecurity experts much, much harder. And there's only so much we can do. And I'll talk more about this in the next section. But so these identifiers, first name only. Okay, I don't think we have a Raul in this class, but let's assume we had a Raul in this class. Oh yeah, Raul had this. Everybody looks around, you have 50 people in this class, but only one person that first name, I got him. Where John, I think we have a couple Johns. Or Chris's, you know, so it depends. First initial with last name, J. also may or may not. Again, in the classroom, it may be, we have 2 Millers, but they have different first initials. 3? I don't know. Place of birth, geographic indicators, height, weight, basic demographic information. You know, somebody in the age category 50 to 60 male in this room. You know, zip code, date of death. Okay, so these are other identifiers when combined with other information can link to an individual and will be considered personally identifiable information. All right, so we've got personally identifiable information. Who's in charge of it? Who knows what information is PII and who can see it? No, in HIPAA, there's no single entity defined to oversee PII. And in cybersecurity, there's no organization oversees it. Rather, patchwork of different laws at the federal level: COPPA, FCRA, FERPA, GLB, HIPAA, state, city, industry-wide levels. You know, oh, I forgot to put in the GDPR. Right, they have their own rules about privacy and personally identifiable information. But yeah, personally identifiable information from a FERPA point of view. I mentioned what FERPA was, right? Federal Educational Right to Privacy Act. So that's student records. I can't post, when I was a student, you went to the professor's office, and this was after FERPA, but they didn't pay attention. And right outside their office was the posting of the grades for the class. For, you know, nothing was electronic, everything was paper. So here's your grades for every assignment, here's your name. Now, some professors were good enough and put down some other identifier usable, the last 4 digits of your student ID or something, but that's not good enough. I did have one professor who in class randomly assigned us an ID the first day of class, and then said that's the one that'll be posted. People used to, oh, homeworks are back, graded on paper. Here, take yours and pass it around. No, that violates FERPA. HIPAA doesn't care about your grades. HIPAA's not going to protect your grades. That's a different rule. Okay, that's where I look at it. So from HIPAA point of view, the personally identifiable health information is defined and watched over by HIPAA. Like I said, it refers to personally identifiable information which covered entities utilize and store during the course of patient care. Only shareable for medical purposes. Covered entities, what do I mean by this? Covered entities are the people who have to protect PHI. Who is that? Your doctor, nurses, the billing people, the receptionists, the lab techs, everybody at the doctor's office, and anybody they contract with. So they work with an insurance company and they share information with the insurance company for billing purposes. The insurance company is also covered under HIPAA. They have medical, or at least used to, medical transcriptionists. Who's that? The doctor is taking notes. They take a little voice recorder. They say their notes in a voice recorder. They send it to somebody else who types up those notes for them. That's your personally identifiable health information is tied on that recording. And this person who, I don't know, lives in San Diego and is typing up the stuff for your doctor here is responsible. I say San Diego because several years ago, there was somebody in San Diego who contracted with a whole lot of doctors' offices to be a medical transcriptionist, and then subcontracted with people across the world to actually do the typing for them, but never told the doctor's offices this. They were making a lot of money because they paid the people over in India typing the stuff much cheaper than they got charged. They charged, but they were not following HIPAA. They were not doing any protections on this information. Those are the covered entities. Anybody who touches and processes your health information. Okay, and it's not just your medical records and test results. Any information doctors use and or disclose during the course of care that can identify information. So your insurance status, your address, all those things are tied in there too. Even if the information doesn't reveal a patient's medical history, it's still considered personally identifiable health information when linked to a health condition. Patient name or email alone can be considered PHI if it's in any way associated with a healthcare provider. There was an example of a case where a child, a teenager, went into a hospital where her mom worked in the emergency room or somewhere in the hospital. Was waiting for her mom, found a sheet of paper on the mom's desk with a list of the patients currently admitted to the hospital, took it home. Sent them emails or something. People have done that. Now, she's not a covered entity. She didn't violate HIPAA, even though she sent information to these people's phones. But her mom, who had that list, she was the covered entity. She was the one who got in trouble. There were people who would sell lists of patients to medical device providers. Hey, these are our patients in this ward. Maybe they want to buy your products and they get some kickback from the device providers. Again, that's HIPAA, that they're covered. Okay, PHI specific identifiers, medical identification numbers, health insurance, beneficiary numbers, health status, blood test results, x-ray results, your x-rays, medical health records, invoices, payment history, appointment reminders, admission discharge dates, medical device identifiers and serial numbers. These rules protect all individually identifiable health information stored or transmitted by health organizations and their subcontractors. Okay. I just bring this out because this is a clear one. It's very understandable for most people. What if I was in a company developing software? What would I worry about in terms of critical information? So let's say Microsoft. Hey, there we go. Big company, right? But just the development side. Let's not worry about any services they provide. Just the development side. What would you worry about in terms of critical information? Not necessarily PII, but anything that could be a critical resource for the company.
Releasing internal code that is important to the structure.
Right, so their source code, that's their intellectual property, that's their bread and butter. That's how they make their money. What else?
Being targeted by outside entities for
That's a threat, but what critical information do they have? Critical resource. Let's not worry about the threats yet.
leaks. Would that be covered? Like a leak?
What do you mean a leak?
Like future features that are secret or released?
Well, again, I'm not worried about the leak, but the future, plans for future products. That's the information we want to protect. Customer information, sure. Employee information. A lot of people who do industrial espionage want to know who's working on which product because they're the one we want to target. Like, oh, there's a guy working on the next generation iPhone. We want to find out about it. We know he goes to this bar every week. This pretty woman goes and sits next to him and they start chatting, and she's smart and she talks tech. She's actually claims to be a sales representative for another company. Just came back from a conference. She's heard she's tired. She's drinking too. They chatted up. Then she says, I got some swag. Things we're giving away at the conference, still in my car. You want some? So she brings him a mug, brings him something else from the company. He's so happy. He's thrilled. They chat. Nothing else happens. She leaves. But he brings the mug to work. In the mug's a hidden microphone and camera. This really happened. So that they could spy on him and get this information. Because they found out where he worked. Is that so? Maybe for that company, that is really important information. More importantly, what are their plans for the future? What is their secret sauce for the source code? What vulnerabilities exist and problems exist in their current software is also a problem. Things that can affect their market share. Okay. What safeguards are now provided? Under HIPAA, organizations must limit and secure PHI access within and from covered entities and their business associates at all times. HIPAA has a standard called the minimum necessary standard, restricts the amount and type of information shareable in patient care to the absolute minimum necessary to achieve a stated purpose. They let the doctor's offices and all deal with that, exactly what that is. They require, like the HIPAA security rule talks about what it needs to be protected. The high-tech rule talks about the technology, but the important things there is they understand people can't do everything. So in the rules, they say you have to have best practices. You have to do minimum necessary standards. You have to have best care. You're not going to be perfect. Information is going to get out. You're not going to be penalized for that as long as you're trying your best. As long as you have a policy in place, as long as you do this operation security thing. If you don't report a breach, don't report a violation, that's worse. Then reporting and say, hey, this happened. We had due care. We tried the right thing. We did what we could. It still happened. We report it. There's things we have to do, but we may not be fined. I didn't encrypt the data. And I put it on a laptop that was in an employee's car and the laptop got stolen. Yeah, I'm a victim of theft, but I didn't do due care because the data was available in a place that somebody could get easier access to. I'm responsible. I don't have to lock it all in a vault in the doctor's office overnight, but maybe a locking file cabinet when nobody's there. So the janitor can't just go in and grab our files. They have to work hard. That's considered minimum necessary care. That's okay. And you do a background check on the janitor. All right, that's step one. What is your critical information? What's important now? What I didn't mention about it that I should is when I do stuff in critical infrastructure, we look at equipment too. Not only critical information, what piece of equipment is most important? This database server, this firewall, this router, this device that is controlling the shutdown of the nuclear power plant if there's an excess of radiation or heat. Those are critical information. Those are things we worry about. We want to protect those. We actually have a whole paper from 2004, I think, where we talk about identifying critical information in the power grid. Critical resources, pieces of equipment, not just information. So think of that in here too. Step 2, threats. So using this list of critical information now, what harm could be caused if information is exposed? So the threat is not that this guy from Russia is trying to attack my system. The threat is this information could be obtained by Russia, and then they know how to break into the power grid if they obtain the designs and the passwords or whatever. You know, this PII could be released to a criminal who can now do identity theft. Or my health information, I could be blackmailed if there's something I don't want publicly known. You know, what is the harm, the loss to confidentiality, integrity, and availability with respect to these critical resources? And then who might exploit it? Is anybody even interested in this data? Or what is the threat? It may not be a who, maybe a what, fire, flood, other things. You know, software company proprietary source codes, that's our critical information. Software could be pirated, fake license keys or other things. Oh, wait, I'm trying to sell this product and people are getting it for free. That's a threat. Competitors could reverse engineer my code and use their algorithms in their own code. I lose my competitive advantage in the market. That's a threat. Step 3, we have vulnerabilities. Those are weaknesses can be exploited to enable a threat. If we're dealing in the confidentiality, integrity, availability, so if the data is being processed, how is it accessed? What protections are in place? Oh, our sales force gets access to our customer database through our website. The threat is somebody else can get access to the customer database. The vulnerability is we have weak passwords. The threat agent, the person who might do this threat, is our competitors. They want the list of our customers. In storage, how is critical information stored? What protections are in place? Are we doing encryption so that if the data is copied, we don't lose it? And in transmission, how is it communicated? What protections are in place when we're transmitting data from one location to another? Again, are we encrypting it? Step 4, now you assess the risk. This is hard. You want to match a threat to a vulnerability to evaluate the risk. So I have this critical information, the customer database, the threat, our competitors get a copy of our customers, the vulnerability, we have weak passwords. How likely is it that our competitors will use those weak passwords to get access to our customer database? Or somebody else will use that weak password, get a copy of our customer database, and then sell it to our competitors. Because understand, your competitors may be honest, but sometimes there's opportunities that are just too good to pass up, and they can have deniability. Well, somebody offered us this information. We don't ask if they stole it or they got it legitimately. We just took it. Now, is that legal? Depends on the situation. I know my father-in-law worked for Lockheed Martin. They were working on a bid for a federal contract, and he did a lot of the finance stuff. He shows up at work one morning, and there's a copy on their fax machine of the preliminary bid from a competitor. Somebody sent it to him. So he received this leaked data. He did what he had to do. He called up the sponsor that they were bidding for and said, we just got this on our fax. We have this information. And then they contacted the other party, the other company, and said, we just got your competitive bid. Ended up, Lockheed Martin decided they weren't going to bid the project. Now, was it somebody, say the other company was McDonnell Douglas, I don't know who it was, say it was McDonnell Douglas. Did they do that deliberately so Lockheed Martin would bow out? Did somebody there be a disgruntled employee who wanted McDonnell Douglas to lose the thing and get Lockheed Martin to win? You would have no idea. They never figured it out. Okay, but you need to match your threats to the vulnerabilities. If there's no vulnerabilities mapped to a specific threat, good, you win, right? If the vulnerability is really hard to exploit, good, you win. You know, the vulnerability, meteor is going to come striking through the roof of this building and kill us all. That's a vulnerability, you know, because we're not protected from that. risk likelihood, very low. Low enough, I'm not gonna worry about it. I'll keep mentioning it because it's so low, I don't worry about it. Wait a minute. If the threat actors are few, then good. Maybe to beat this, somebody has to be able to crack my crypto system, and they need a network of supercomputers to be able to do that. There's very few people with networks of supercomputers. It's nation states. Is the nation state after my personal stuff? Probably not. My cybersecurity research, depending on who I'm working for, maybe. If I'm in the Department of Energy lab, I'm Schweitzer Engineering and vulnerabilities and stuff to protect our power grid, yeah. Yeah. Industrial chocolate chip cookie recipe versus a home recipe. You know, nation state, nobody's actually going, no nation state's going after the industrial chocolate chip cookie recipe. And definitely not going after my home recipe. You know. And then step 5, now you apply your countermeasures to reduce the risk. So we know, here's the risk. The customer data could be stolen by a competitor. We have a vulnerability, weak passwords, countermeasures, stronger passwords, we win. Right? I mean, that's what you want to do. Stronger passwords, better encryption, better employee training. All those things are countermeasures that we can look at. That was that whole list of controls I was talking about. We want to break that threat vulnerability path. At least make the risk low. The likelihood a threat actor would be able to exploit that vulnerability to enable that threat is low. Then you got to evaluate the effectiveness of the countermeasures. And we put in these great, secure, very strict password rules. How effective are they? Oh, everybody's writing down their passwords on sticky notes on their desk. And anybody can walk through the office or up on their ceiling. Yeah, it's not good. I talked about the drinking birds here, right? Where people had screen timeouts. And so they had mouse jiggers, other things, keep their screens active. The controls were so overbearing, people found ways around them. They weren't effective. You need to look at this. It's an iterative process. You know, now what are new vulnerabilities, new threats, new controls, new information systems? Rank the risk. Are there vulnerabilities? Oh, I had this great control. I was using MD5 hash algorithms. Oh, it's now broken. That's now a vulnerability. I know this happened to somebody. There was a whole, and I don't remember the name of it. There was a whole network communication framework that a lot of companies were using. Major vulnerability came in it. Found out. Now all these companies who thought they were using this correctly, and they were, now had a new vulnerability. Okay. That was the process of OPSEC. The book also talks about the laws of operation security, which do things slightly different, but it's really the same thing. Except here, the first law is know the threats. Each piece of information may be susceptible to unique threats. You should think outside the box. Don't assume people will never do that. Don't assume, oh, small mom and pop shop, which we see this all the time in Idaho. Hey, nobody's going to attack us. Yeah, you have an insurance policy to protect you just in case. You're covered for $250,000 worth of loss. They'll do a ransomware attack against you for $250,000. Your insurance will cover it. They'll do it because you have something that they can get, and it's cheap to do a ransomware attack against you. I can launch 10,000 ransomware attacks for a couple $100. One of them comes through for a couple, for tens of thousands of dollars. I win. That's a good day's work. Next. Threats may be contextual, where the data and processing location is. Maybe I don't have a threat, or maybe I don't have a vulnerability, or the risk is low here, but the moment I walk across a border into another country, the threat changes. There's several countries that will take electronic equipment and scan it. They will copy what's on your hard drive when you go through security. I know when the new I think it was the new iPhone came out, people going into Israel had it confiscated for a couple of days as Israeli security was examining these new phones. Schweitzer Engineering, I know somebody went to do a demo in China, brought one of their boxes through security, didn't get it back till he was ready to leave. He ended up having to use a different box that fortunately somebody had there. When he got it back, it was in pieces. They completely disassembled it. You know, the threat is very different there than it is the box sitting in my lab. All right, regulation laws may be different in different locations. They change over time too. Oh, well, this used to be legal, not anymore. In France, I haven't checked this. I keep forgetting to check this. It used to be you had to have a license to use encryption in France, beyond a certain level of encryption. In the United States, I cannot export certain encryption technology beyond a certain strength. Child pornography is another one people talk about. It's like, okay, what are the laws of consent? Right? In a certain state, it's at 16. So posting nude pictures of somebody who's 17 years old is not child pornography in that state. In another state, the age is 18, 17-year-old is child pornography. Okay, now we're on an internet, everything's shared. Which rule applies? Oh, we're using the cloud. We're storing things on a cloud server. Well, cloud servers are based around the world. As it bounces in the server around the world, here it's legal, there it's not, here it's illegal, there it's not. What do you do? There's a lot of discussion about that. There are things that are very legal in the United States with adults and other things that are completely illegal in other parts of the country and other parts of the world and vice versa. You know, there's decency laws and other things that are really strict in certain countries. We're a little more liberal about that. Where's the law applied? My data suddenly moved. I stored it. I thought I stored it in Idaho, and suddenly it's in Saudi Arabia. What happens? You know, the rules are different. We don't know how that's going to pair out just yet. Companies try to not move data around between countries, but they definitely move it around within the inside a country. Second law, you need to know what to protect. We talked about this already. Nice thing here, this one talks about is, can you group documents, databases, files, or information? Can I say, oh, all of this is proprietary source code for this product. I don't have to talk about each piece of information. It's this group. This is employee records. I don't have to talk about every single employee. It's that group, and there's a law that applies to that whole group. That group, that collection of information will have related threats and related vulnerabilities to the way we're processing that information. So that makes things a little easier for us. If you group the information, you always make sure you know what group the information belongs to. It helps you simplify the process, and you make sure nothing's missed. Everything is related to one or more groups. Third law is then you protect the information. If you don't take steps to protect your information, you lose. A California-based email marketing company, SaberSpy, in 2018, they're keeping people's emails. 43 gigabytes of user data, names, email addresses, physical addresses, gender of over 10 million users. Servers containing the data were wide open. Somebody used Shodan. Shodan is a network search tool. They said, hey, let's search for things. And they found these servers. These weren't publicly available servers. There wasn't a website to access them, but there were protocols to access them. They found them, and they got 43 gigabytes of user data. Because the company was like, oh, well, nobody knows where it is. We don't have to, that's our protection. Yeah, no. Security by obscurity loses. The only place that works is for passwords and encryption keys. So any questions on that? I talked longer than I expected, but still have time.